Oh, it is that time again here on Purple Insider. Matthew Coller and Manny Hill. That is Hot Routes time on a Thursday night as Thursday night football is going on, and the Buffalo Bills playing the Tampa Bay Bucks. So hopefully you're watching the game, having a good time, and enjoying our show as well. Or if you don't have Amazon Prime, then you're just watching us and refreshing Twitter over and over again to see what's happening in the game. That's if you are cheap. But I've seen comments, Manny, that Al Michaels is into this one tonight because the Buffalo crowd is juiced, but I'm not sure it's going to be a good game. The NFC South is truly abominable. And in recent weeks, when I have watched the Tampa Bay Bucks, the one game, no matter what happens this year with the Vikings, whether they finish 11-6 or 6-11, I will still go back to that Bucks game and go, that's the one. That's the one that messed up this whole thing. Because otherwise, instead of going down to Green Bay, hoping for 4-4, hoping to get on a run, hoping to compete for the division, if they were 4-3, looking at going 5-3, and then with the teams coming up that they're facing, we'd be talking about, wow, Kevin O'Connell has done it again with this team, and like they're coming together and they could be maybe a little bit dangerous. And instead, we're still kind of having that I don't know kind of discussion because of that loss to the Bucks. And that this Bucks team is just not very good, Manny.
They're really not. And I tweeted out after the game Monday night, after the Vikings beat the Niners, and I said, it's that damn Bucks game, man. If they win that game, they're sitting at 4-3, and they're a game out of first place. And then you look at the way the Lions performed in Baltimore on Sunday. The Lions suddenly don't look like this completely unstoppable team that we thought that they were kind of becoming in previous weeks, that, they were maybe going to run away with this division, and they still might. But watching them play in Baltimore on Sunday kind of has you thinking, well, if the Vikings can string together a couple of wins here, they can kind of keep themselves in the conversation for the division. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you still look at that Tampa Bay game from week one, and you're just like, God, that's the one. I know somebody replied back to it talking about the Chargers game too. And, you could make that argument. I think, if they score on that last drive at the end and beat the Chargers, we're probably still having a similar conversation. But I think that Bucks loss could stand to be more impactful because it's an NFC opponent. And when you're talking about tiebreakers and things like that, I mean, even forget about the NFC North. If you're talking about just trying to get one of those wild card spots, that could be the difference in terms of tiebreakers with conference records. So that'll be interesting to see how things kind of play out the rest of this season, if that's the game that ultimately comes back to bite them in the end.
Yeah, and certainly the Chargers game is a nomination, but the Chargers, I think, outplayed them in a lot of ways in that game. And I remember looking at one of the things I like to look at is the win probability fluctuations throughout a game that will kind of tell you how random it was, or where was it a back and forth game? Was it a true one score game? If you're going down the stretch at the end and, there's a 50-50 shot in the fourth quarter. And the Chargers game wasn't really that way. I mean, the Vikings got a really great break when the Chargers tried to hand off to a backup running back on fourth down. So even though some of the breaks went against them earlier in the game, they also were helped out quite a few times by the Chargers as well. But overall, you figure Los Angeles is a pretty good team, and their quarterback played great in that game, and they outplayed you in a lot of ways. So, okay, you come away with a loss there. Tampa Bay was just crazy. They had the ball like 2 times in the entire second half, and Baker Mayfield claimed to have, or his teammate claimed that they knew some of the Viking signals. Oh, we lost Manny. Okay. Manny, come back. Okay, let me put myself in the middle then here until Manny returns. Not with a line down my face. This operation becomes more complicated without Manny. All right, there we go. Okay, we'll have to get him back. Internet troubles. So anyway, the Tampa Bay game is not only the one that is giving the Vikings trouble with their season, but also is surprising because when I watched them play the last couple of weeks, they lost to Atlanta, and now they're trailing Buffalo. They're just not that good of a football team. But what Manny and I are, and Manny just texted me. He will return when his internet returns, so don't worry. But if you're watching and you want to jump in the comment section with some thoughts on this, then please do, because the main topic of tonight's show, and hopefully we get Manny back in a second here, is just about this Vikings-Packers rivalry and the next phase of it. Because most of my entire life, even though I didn't grow up in Minnesota and only moved here in 2016, most of my life, though, was watching Packers and Vikings games that were on at 325 all the time because they're showing off, Brett Favre, and nobody liked Brett Favre more than those Fox afternoon games. And there were so many gems and classics along the way. And we'll talk about them throughout the show. But they were rooted in the idea that they had Favre, they had Rodgers, and there was nothing better for Vikings fans than taking down these quarterbacks that got talked about all the time. John Madden obsessing over Brett Favre, and when the Vikings would beat them, there was just so much extra energy to that win because you knew who you were going up against. It meant so much more to beat those guys. I mean, think about even the opener last year setting the tone for the entire season of beating Aaron Rodgers. Hey, there's Manny. Let's get Manny back in. Here we go. There we go. Now I got to fix a bunch of stuff, Manny. It really throws the operation off. There we go. Let's put a little box around us. Yeah, you were so upset about the loss to the Bucks by the Vikings that you just completely quit the stream. But I've moved on in topics, Manny, and I'm talking about now this Vikings-Packers rivalry. And
Yes.
it's really entering a brand new phase where for so long it was, if you beat them, that made your season because you knew that you were beating one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And there was a confidence to that. There was an energy that came along with that. And I guess what I wonder is, having watched those battles, Harrison Smith talked about it with us today, about how he and Aaron Rodgers would be staring each other down on every play. And he told the story where Aaron Rodgers sort of waved to him like, I know you're coming down to the line of scrimmage. Come on down. I know, like the cat and mouse game that they would play. It's just not the same with Jordan Love, I think. But we're going to start to find out this week.
Yeah, we are. And, it's just been such a roller coaster, just up and down ride with Jordan Love, where, he looks good in moments, and then other moments he's making throws and decisions where you're just like, dude, what the hell are you doing? What are you looking at? And I think you could maybe question, does he have enough? Do they really have enough around him to really be like a serious contender and for him to have the most possible success? But yeah, you're right. I mean, the feeling of this rivalry is just a little different. When you don't have that rock star, superstar, Hall of Fame quarterback to go up against, to really kind of root against, like we had for basically 30 years between Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. It takes a little bit of air out of the sails of this rivalry. It's just not quite as heated. And I think you kind of talked about this last year, I remember, about just like, if it's not Aaron Rodgers, it's just not going to feel the same, because so much of it is going in and beating Aaron Rodgers. And I remember, a few times when the Vikings would go up against the Packers and Aaron Rodgers wouldn't play because he got injured or got injured in the game. There was the one weird game in 2013, I think, where he was already injured. It was the year I think he broke his collarbone, and they came back and won the division in week 17 against the Bears. But he was out that game, and I think it was like Seneca Wallace and Scott Tolzien or something playing for the Packers that day. And it was just, the Vikings weren't very good either that year. That was the last year with Leslie Frazier. And it just kind of, it didn't have the same oomph, that same, level of intrigue, because, the Vikings weren't very good. And then on top of that, Aaron Rodgers, who's public enemy number one in Minnesota at that point, isn't playing either. It just, it's not the same when you don't have that great Hall of Fame quarterback to go against.
I will throw out a trivia question to you. You may already have seen the answer on Twitter or know this in your big Manny brain anyway. But for the comment section, then I'll give the answer in a second. The last quarterback not named Rodgers or Favre to beat the Vikings. And I think I've only covered one game where it wasn't Rodgers, and that would be, or at least starting the game, because Anthony Barr hurt him in 2017. And then we went down, it was like -4 degrees at Lambeau, and Brett Hundley was horrendous. And I think the Vikings defense shut them out and so forth. And so that was without Rodgers, but they never beat the Vikings except for kind of back when. It's not the Magic Man, not Dan Majowski. It was a great question. And there's always a lot of different spellings of his name that you see anytime anyone takes a shot at it. But yeah, so I got this right. Kevin Seifert brought this up in the media room today, and I got this right. It was some time ago, and it's a guy that you do not think of as being a Packers quarterback. So do you not know this?
I don't know this. This had to have been what, like pre-Favre, right? So this would have been like 91-ish, maybe 1990, something like that, probably.
Yep. Yep.
And it wasn't
So
it wasn't Don Majkowski. Okay.
It wasn't. It was not Dan Mikowski. Think about it, and we'll talk for a few minutes, and then I'll give you the answer, because I want to give everybody a chance in the comments to see if anyone can get it. But I was, let's say, I was very proud of myself that I ended up getting this with only one hint. It was not Doug Peterson either. That was a guess as well. So I said when they traded Rodgers to the Jets, you'll miss him a little bit. You'll miss him a little bit. And I think most people would disagree for this week if you want the Vikings to get back in it. I kind of don't really believe people all the time when they say that they want them to tank and lose every game. But then I don't know. I see a lot of people celebrating when you win against San Francisco. If you're given the choice, and I know the long-term implications, but you'd rather go and you'd rather beat the Green Bay Packers, I'm sure, for 95% of the fan base, and not talk about tanking and not talk about trading people and everything else. So you're not going to miss him this week, because what he did against them last year, even though the Vikings beat themselves in some ways, he had a play where he kind of faked somebody out. I think it might have been Brian Asamoah, where he faked somebody out and then went into the end zone. I was like, okay, you won't miss that. You won't miss that. What you will miss is I always liked this: the mutual respect between the organizations, and between, I think even the fan bases have this. There's a, like, we hate the Packers, but like they're good or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I think there is a respect there. But I really appreciated the Mike Zimmer defense versus Aaron Rodgers battles. And Rodgers won sometimes and Zimmer won sometimes, but you always knew that it was going to be tight and it was going to be tough, and it was going to be, Aaron Rodgers maybe looking like the worst version of himself sometimes, or having to do some stuff that was totally out of this world. That I going down to cover it, I will miss, now that it's Kevin O'Connell, it's Jordan Love, it's Matt LaFleur. The two franchises are wearing the same clothes, but not that sort of energy that when you build up to it, you go, these two guys are going to throw blows at each other, Mike Zimmer's defense and Aaron Rodgers on offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always would hear about every time that week leading up to a Packer Viking game, and whether it was you or somebody else, you or Courtney or somebody else in that media room talking to Mike Zimmer, and you would ask him about just going up against Aaron Rodgers, and he always just talked about how it was such a challenge to put together a game plan for that week to shut down Aaron Rodgers. And it's, as we've seen for a decade and a half with Aaron Rodgers, you don't just shut him down. I mean, we've just very rarely have seen Aaron Rodgers just be absolutely terrible. We have seen it a couple of times, and even even during the Mike Zimmer era, there were a couple of times where Zimmer's defense was able to kind of get the best of him. Didn't happen a lot, but it happened a few times. It happened enough times to remember. And yeah, I mean, it was just amazing. And that part of it is the stuff that you miss. You do miss kind of the chess matches between, the great Hall of Fame quarterback and the defensive minded head coach that's going up against him. who knows what's going to happen with Jordan Love going forward, if he's going to end up, developing into this stud player. But it's just it's not the same as what we've seen, and certainly in the last 10 years.
Wonder how many times they've played since Favre became a Green Bay Packer, and the two teams had records this bad this far into the season. Normally, at least the Packers, but it wasn't always them, that at least one of the teams the game would be very meaningful for. And you're talking about a team chasing the division, chasing potentially going deep in the playoffs and so forth. And it had that meaning too. And now this is two teams trying to save themselves from drowning. And that's just not what we expect from the Vikings. Even when Kirk had to miss that one game and Sean Mannion had to start, there was still playoffs on the line. And we're going to get to, you've got a list of your 5 favorite. I've covered them all since I moved here. So I made my list entirely based on just games that I've covered between the Packers and the Vikings. This is just an unusual situation. And another thing I want to talk about after I give you the trivia question answer is just whether we think it will be good, because these teams are not great and they have weaknesses, but the calamity element of both teams could result in maybe more madness than what we would expect before, where we would expect really good football. I mean, think of some of the matchups, even that we've seen the last few years. Everson Griffin versus David Bakhtiari, Xavier Rhodes versus Devontae Adams. I mean, these individual matchups, Harrison Smith, I think, playing games with the quarterback, Eric Kendricks the same way. And this year, the individual matchups don't have that same energy, especially since Justin Jefferson is not playing. Lynn Dickey is a good guess. It is actually Mike Tomczak.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Mike Tomczak. And the only hint that Kevin Seifert gave he gave 2 hints. One, it's not somebody you typically think of as a Packer. And 2, it was somebody who was more known for playing for another team in the Central. And I said Mike Tomczak. So nailed it. Very proud of myself for getting that one. Do you think it will be a good game, or is it going to be another version of what we saw in Chicago? And I'm going to drive back from Lambeau regretting the fact that I drove all the way to Lambeau?
I kind of have a sneaky feeling that it is going to be a pretty good, pretty competitive game. Um, I think because like you said, these teams are kind of in similar spots where they're both just kind of scratching and clawing to just kind of stay in the thick of things as far as trying to get a playoff spot. And I think the atmosphere will be solid. And the Vikings are feeling pretty good about themselves, coming off a really impressive win against a great team that I think a lot of people thought were really going to kind of run the Vikings out of US Bank Stadium with the kind of season that the Niners had. So the Vikings are feeling pretty good about themselves. The Packers maybe not so much right now, but I think the Packers being home, it's certainly a game that I think the players will get up for, and I think I think you combine those things, and I think it'll end up being a pretty solid, fun game.
I think so, but I just have trouble trusting this Vikings team to deliver on what we think they should, right? And
Yeah.
the Packers, I don't really know either, because the Packers have played exciting games. They've played them against Atlanta and Denver, but the Vikings played tight games with Carolina and Chicago. I mean, there's only one game that separates these two teams, and they can't really look at the Packers and say, "Oh, we're way better than you," because they have one good win on the season. The Packers played better against the Bears, and we could go round and round of, you lost to this team, so we're better. You played this way against that team. It's never been a great way to evaluate. But what both teams have is enough talent to make it interesting. And on the defensive side, especially for the Packers, although they are really banged up looking at their injury report, but they have enough talent on that side. If Jair Alexander plays, he's got a back issue. He did not practice today, but Rashawn Gary's a great pass rusher. I'm sure they're going to try to move him around to get him maybe away from Christian Darrisaw, who's just ruining everyone's life over there because he's so good. Pass rushers just are completely taken out on his side. But they've got defensive players who can cause problems for the Vikings. The fact that Jefferson is out last week against the 49ers, they had a perfect game plan against them. But the week before, Jordan Addison, they were able to largely take him out of the game. And TJ Hawkinson was not a big factor against the Chicago Bears. So I'm not sure how much I trust them. It really comes down to whether this game is going to be good or not, is A, how they game plan against the Vikings. The 49ers, I thought, did a tremendously bad job of it, and give the Vikings credit, but they basically said, like, you're not going to beat our man-to-man coverage a lot of times. And the Vikings were like, no, actually we can't. Like, that's really what we do. And they did. You won't be able to protect well enough to beat our man-to-man coverage. And they found a way to do it. That's like, I guess the 49ers hadn't checked the Vikings since like 2019. The offensive line's better now. It really comes down to, is Jordan Love going to have a good day and make this interesting and be patient and complete passes over the middle like we've seen the good quarterbacks do, and chip away at this Vikings defense? Is Aaron Jones going to play, catch passes out of the backfield? Or is Jordan Love just going to get totally confused by Brian Flores and get lost and lose? I really don't see a scenario where the Packers offense can run away from the Vikings, though.
I don't either, and I think it's just because they've been so inconsistent, and Jordan Love specifically has been so inconsistent. It's, you watch him play and you can see some flashes of, like, okay, I see why they liked him. I see why there's a thought that he can be pretty good, and then he'll just do something, and you're like, no, that's not it, dude. You're not supposed to do that at this level in this league. Um, but I think, if he's going to have success, it kind of feels like he's going to have to get out to a really good start. Can't have, if they go 3-and-out to start out the game, the Vikings defense is going to feel really good at that point because they're off to a nice start. And then, you might have to start looking at some of the body language on the Packers side. Is Jordan Love, is he kind of looking frustrated early on? That could be a sign of things to come for the rest of the day. But if they come out and they start moving the ball, and even if they get down in position and kick a field goal, Packers offense will be feeling pretty good, and then it'll be interesting to see how the Vikings sort of counter that. And then, the offense too. I mean, are we going to see a Jair Alexander, Jordan Addison matchup? How is that? That's going to be a challenge for a guy who kind of had his coming out party last on Monday night. Jordan Addison was outstanding, and I mean, he's looking like he's going to be just an absolute stud. And going forward with him and Justin Jefferson on the same team is just going to be incredible. But he's going to be going up against potentially, one of the best cover corners in the National Football League, and Jair Alexander, and that's going to be a challenge for him. How does he perform with that? Does he get frustrated if things aren't going his way? I mean, we kind of saw that a little bit with Justin Jefferson last year in the game at Lambeau, where, Justin didn't really have much of an impact in that game. You could kind of see he was frustrated because that was a matchup he was getting up for. Will that happen with Jordan Addison on Sunday? That'll be interesting to see too.
They've got the right cleats this time, and that's important. So that was a storyline from last year's game. Yeah, I saw you trying there, Manny, like really trying to muster all the takes for this game. There's just not the same twinkle in your eye without Rodgers. And, maybe the rivalry, though, considering the 2 games last year against Detroit and how competitive they were, Vikings, coming away with the last minute win, the Detroit throwing a pass to their offensive tackle to end the game. Like, maybe there's a Detroit thing that starts to happen here with them, being good, and the Vikings potentially building, a team that's really good here around Jefferson, Addison, the offensive tackles. And it's possible the next 30 years are Vikings and Lions. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like this rivalry with the Packers is going to have a lot of juice going forward, unless Jordan Love, the light comes on and then he's great. I think it's far too early to say that he just stinks and it'll never be fun again. Speaking of fun, Manny, pizza's fun. And you should make Little Caesars, the official pizza sponsor of the NFL, part of your game day. Order online during their Pizza pregame 1 hour before NFL games and get ready for some football and fun. Choose your favorite Little Caesars pizza or pick the toppings you crave. Either way, you win. And speaking of winning, everyone scores with convenient delivery on their in-store pizza portal pickup. So grab some friends, enjoy a few slices during the tastiest hour before kickoff. Pizza, pizza. And I want to remind you guys that Purple Insider's going to Vegas, baby, in December. That's right. We are going to Vegas for football. And if you would like to escape the Minnesota December weather like me, come join me at Circa in Las Vegas, where I will be hanging out and doing the podcast for a couple days leading up to the game. You will be able to find me at outside there at Stadium Swim, watching games on their gigantic television, spending times relaxing in their heated pools, which is very nice. It's one of the coolest places I have ever been to watch sports. Then on Friday night before the game, there's going to be a special party just for Minnesota fans that includes drink specials and a 2-ticket giveaway to the game. So come meet me there. Talk football at the amazing Overhang Bar inside Circa. You have to RSVP though, so go to circalasvegas.com, go to Sportsbook, click where it says Huddle Up at Overhang. So circalasvegas.com, Sportsbook, and Huddle Up at Overhang. And then you can make a whole weekend of it at Circa. So book your spot today, and I will see you there. All right, Manny, you got a list. You were assigned homework to make a list. Top 5 Vikings and Packers games of your lifetime. We can go back to Bart Starr or whatever. Sorry if you're old and you want to bring up those games, go ahead. But we've got a pretty big sample size of Favre Rodgers versus the Vikings, and you have made a list of 5. I have made a list of 5 games that I've covered since moving here. So let's go with your top 5 favorite Vikings-Packers games of your lifetime.
Okay, so I went 2 different routes here because I kind of figured your top 5 would be games that you've covered, and you've been here since 2016, correct? So I didn't pick any games. I didn't pick any games from the time that you've been here because I figured I'd let you have your shine on that. But I did kind of go a homer route. All 5 of the games that I picked were Vikings wins. So, of course, I had to. Although there have been some great games in my lifetime that the Packers ultimately won that I think you can look back on as just great football games. So I'll count down from 5 to 1. Number 5 for me was 2015, week 17. The Vikings and Packers are playing at Lambeau. Both teams are 10-5. Basically, the winner of this game wins the NFC North and hosts a playoff game next week. The Packers go in, or the Vikings go in, and really, for the most part, Mike Zimmer's defense does a really nice job on Aaron Rodgers, and the Vikings end up winning that game 20-13. It was kind of a weird game. The ending of the game, Aaron Rodgers still has like a Hail Mary shot to try and tie the game in the closing seconds. There was a weird moment where Teddy Bridgewater threw an interception left-handed. He was getting sacked, and he kind of just tried to improvise, and he threw the ball with his left hand and ended up getting picked off, I think, by Desmond Bishop, if I remember. So that was just kind of a weird week 17, everything on the line type of game. Both teams were going to the playoffs, regardless of the result. But, Vikings were trying to win the division, and they did. So that one, 20-13 was the final in that one. Number 4 was another week 17 game in 2012. The Vikings win on a Blair Walsh field goal at the end to clinch a playoff spot, 37-34. That game is significant, though, because because it was kind of a back and forth battle, but that was also the game that Adrian Peterson got to the 2,000-yard mark for that season and ended up, I think he was 9 yards short of breaking Eric Dickerson's single season record, almost 2,100 yards for the season. And it was a really, really entertaining game. Christian Ponder actually played pretty well, probably the best game of his career. Actually, came through with some plays and some nice throws, and the Vikings were able to win the game at the buzzer to go to the playoffs. The following week, they went into Lambeau and got beat anyway. The game that Joe Webb started, the rest is history there. Number 3, 2009, I think it was week 7. I could be wrong on that, but it was Brett Favre's return to Lambeau Field. Just so much going into that game. He had already played the Packers earlier in the season. They beat him on Monday night. And this game was even bigger than that because it was Favre going back to his old stomping grounds. And he was just fantastic in the game. Threw 4 touchdown passes, and the Vikings win 38-26. Number 2, 1998, I believe it was week 5, Vikings 37, Packers 24. Randy Moss on Monday Night Football, as a rookie, really just comes in and just annihilates the Packers. He's just catching everything. Randall Cunningham's just throwing bombs to him, and the Vikings go in and really kind of destroy the Packers. And this was a Packers team that had just been to the Super Bowl 2 years in a row prior to this. So this was, still Brett Favre is still in his prime, still one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Packers still one of the best teams in the league. And here comes this rookie, freakish wide receiver out of Marshall University, and he just destroys the Packers. Number one is another Randy Moss game. Has to be the 2004 wild card game. Vikings going to Lambeau, beat the Packers 31-17. The Randy Moss Moon game. One of the things that I remember that was kind of underrated about that game was, I think it was Pam Oliver on the sidelines talking to Mike Tice right before kickoff. And just seeing Ticey talk, and there was just kind of this like looseness about him, where it was just like the Vikings almost were just kind of playing with house money going into that game. They kind of backed into the playoffs. They weren't playing well down the stretch of the season. They had the game the week before in Washington, the last game of the season, where Randy Moss walked off the field before the game was actually over. So there was kind of that drama going on, and the team was just loose. All the guys on the team that normally wore cornrows, including Randy Moss, they all had their hair pulled out, and they all had like afros and everything, and it was great. And Randy Moss put on a show with playing on one leg with the hamstring, had the moon play, and it was great. And Favre was awful that game. I think he threw 4 picks in the game, and it was just a lot of fun. So that's my top 5.
Here's how you know I've been doing this a while. I've watched every single one of those games back since I've been here, or I remember some of them. I remember the Randy Moss breakout game against the Packers, but the 2015 one, it doesn't really stand out, I think, in the lore of this matchup as much as maybe it should, because of what happened the following week and Blair Walsh shanking the field goal. If Blair Walsh makes it, I wonder what happens, because Mike Zimmer had that defense playing as an elite unit at that point.
Yes.
They really emerged, 2 years later, 2017. They had their moments in 2016, but that was as good of a defense. Xavier Rhodes, halfway through that season, starts to take on that role of being the island corner. And I think that that's the last time someone has week in and week out, Xavier Rhodes in general, actually been an island corner, not just playing sides and sometimes following a receiver one week or not, but every single week was starting to follow the best wide receivers. Sharif Floyd was playing at that point. Like, that was a really darn good defense. And if they don't miss the field goal, or maybe it's a little warmer outside, you wonder how far that defense could have taken them, because that was the sign of, well, this defense is really, really good. There's a lot to say about each one of those games. Great list, though. Every one of those games are complete classics in the lore of Vikings and Packers. So it is a little harder for me to have the same pop on my list as yours, because it's only limited to games that I've covered. But there's a different story for each one of these. I will start out with last year's opener, and even though it was not a good game and it was not that close, there's huge significance to it, being that Justin Jefferson did what he did after saying in the offseason, I want to be the best receiver in the NFL, comes out and immediately blows away the Green Bay Packers. Kevin O'Connell, the way that the offense operated, new head coach, the buzz in that building, I don't know if it's actually been matched since. It was pretty good on Monday night, but half the stadium, or whatever, a quarter of the stadium, was 49ers fans. And that night, though, or that afternoon, it was just a new energy and a new vibe. So even though it wasn't like an instant classic football game, it was, I thought, a significant win for the organization that would start off that journey of a 13-win season. That was a pretty fun one. Actually, the year before is a forgotten classic because of the way the season ended. And that was a 34-31 win by the Vikings, in which, hey, if you thought Kirk Cousins played his best game on Monday, go back and watch this one. 34-31. He was marvelous. The Vikings gave up a couple of big deep shots to Aaron Rodgers, and Kirk comes this close to throwing an interception at the end. But instead, Adam Thielen kind of swipes the ball away, shades of what happened the other night with Jordan Addison. They go on, they score. It was just one of those back and forth. Rodgers at his best. Again, the atmosphere in the game, it was great, even though that season was kind of miserable. So that's number 4 on my list. The funny thing about my list is that it kind of goes backwards, like almost in order here. And I did not do this on purpose. 2018, Manny, was a game I debated between 2018, a national TV game, and one that the Vikings lost, where they had come back from down 21-0, but I decided we won't include that one. But in 2018, there was a lot of drama going on. And on the other side, Mike McCarthy was kind of falling apart with that team. And again, this was one that was on national TV. Kirk Cousins steps up. Kyle Rudolph had a big game in that one, and they end up winning 24-17. Again, this is not the most exciting game of all time, but it was a huge win for them at the time, and it meant a lot. Now, the last 2 are great. So those ones are like, okay, all right, well, they happen, and it's pretty memorable or whatever. The last 2 are just ones that you'll never forget. 29-29, 2018. In one of the silliest, most absurd games. The game is over, but then the Packers get called for hitting the quarterback, and it was early in the season, so they were calling everything with hitting the quarterback. And then the Vikings got called for one, and then Daniel Carlson misses 3 field goals, but Mason Crosby also missed a couple field goals, and it went back and forth and back and forth. And here's a chance to win the game. Missed field goal. 29-29, weirdest thing I've ever seen, walking out of there where no one was talking. Everyone was just completely shocked. What do we say? What is it? What just happened? What did we just see? Totally, totally bizarre. Both locker rooms were super angry after the game that they didn't win it because they had so many chances. There were clutch plays, great throws, great catches, crazy everything, and nobody won. And then this one I would put on any list of all-time great Vikings-Packers games ever. The opening of US Bank Stadium and my first home game ever covering the Minnesota Vikings. Sam Bradford shows up 2 weeks later. He takes over, wins 17-14, a breakout game for Stephon Diggs. I think Kyle Rudolph caught the first touchdown in US Bank Stadium history. Trey Waynes with the late game interception. Mike Zimmer using that insane crowd to mess with Aaron Rodgers all night. That was, the only time I've ever heard a stadium louder was the Superdome in the playoffs, and that's it. And since then, it has never been louder. And Minneapolis Miracle and Taylor Swift's concert. That was also insanely loud. So those are the only louder that I've heard than that game. But that was nuts. And even though the season would end up going sideways, what a moment to open that building with a win over the Packers in that way. So did I forget any, Manny, of the 2016 to present Vikings-Packers era?
No, those were all good. The 29-29 game in 2018, I mean, that will forever be known as the Daniel Carlson game because of the kicks that he did not make. And then, of course, Mike Zimmer, when the next day when Daniel Carlson got released, the question, what went into the decision to let Daniel Carlson go? Did you see the game? All of that stuff is memorable, and yeah, what a weird day that was. That 2016 game to open up US Bank Stadium. I mean, it was so absurd watching Sam Bradford doing what he was doing after having been with the team for literally like 2 weeks. Like, I mean, that was for him to just kind of seamlessly step in and play pretty well. And I remember he had like I don't know if it was like a gash or something on his hand. And I remember he came out of the game briefly, and everybody, and Sam Bradford's got this injury history in his career. He's always been the guy that was kind of banged up and had knee injuries and all this stuff. So it's like it's his first game. He's playing great. And then all of a sudden he comes out of the game with like this hand injury. Nobody really knows what's going on. It's like, oh no, come on. Like, are you serious? This guy's playing great in his first game, and now he's going to be out. Like, what's going on? And then he comes back in and everything is fine. And yeah, that was a really, really fun night. I think just because it was so unexpected for Sam Bradford to just come in like that, sort of cold turkey, and just play the way that he did. It was a lot of fun.
There's a lot of memories I have from that game. One is I remember Sam Bradford on a play action hit Stephon Diggs for like a 40-yard post route. And I was like, this Stephon Diggs guy is unreal. Do you guys know how good this player is? And after that, he went on and on. Also, Adrian Peterson got hurt, which would linger over the team really in the second half of the season. Is he coming back? Then he had a surgery that instead of getting him back as soon as he could, he did like a different surgery that kept him out longer, which caused some tension between him and the team because Zimmer wanted him back and they couldn't run the football. And instead, and so forth. And there was just some frustration inside the locker room with Adrian Peterson specifically. They lost both of their tackles. I think Khalil got hurt that night, and maybe Andre Smith got hurt the week before. So then that was a whole thing. And Jake Long showed up, and TJ Clemmings, and everything else. It all kind of started with that game. And before that, Mike Zimmer was trying to do a little like, are we really going to start Bradford? I don't know. And I remember Mike McCarthy being like, yeah, we know they're going to start Bradford. and, and Zimmer was so mad that we reported about Sam Bradford taking reps with the first team in practice because he didn't think that we should have put that out there. And then Mike McCarthy was just like, yeah, we already knew. So it wasn't a big deal, but kind of funny stuff. And that was like, I was still, my head spinning, just got to Minnesota, just had moved, went to the state fair for the first time. Teddy gets hurt. They trade for Bradford. And then now they're open in the stadium with that win. So really, 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 really fun times for me. Easily the number one. A lot of them have been crazy, but they've had like really horrific losses. The interception by Kirk in the end zone to lose the game last year with kind of the 7-stud no-show, you could call it. The mutiny in 2016 at the end of the season, the Kirk gets COVID game. I mean, there's so many where even in 2019 where it looked like Zimmer might get fired after they lost so badly against the Packers at home. That was the one where they didn't have any running backs, and I think Mike Boone had to start, and they just ran over them. So a lot of these games have gone along with kind of gut punch losses, and maybe even more than they have huge momentum gaining wins since I've covered the team. So there you have it. You also wanted to talk about your sort of favorite crossover players, because what we do a lot of times when it's a random opponent is we go, hey, top 5 favorite players who played for the Chiefs. But you can't do top 5 favorite Packers on a show that covers the Vikings. People will be upset. We can't have people being upset. So how about crossover players, your favorite crossover players who are Vikings and Packers?
Well, I will go, in no particular order, but I'll start with Ryan Longwell as a kicker. And Longwell was a really good kicker for a long time in Green Bay, as Vikings fans know. And then he comes over in 2016 or 2006, I believe, and he was kind of one of the big free agent signings that Brad Childress and that whole front office did. They had made sort of the quasi trade for Steve Hutchinson and signed him to that poison pill contract and everything. But Ryan Longwell was another one of those kind of the big names, and we stole their kicker, and that was kind of the big thing. But then Ryan Longwell ended up being a really good kicker for the Vikings too for I think it was about 6 seasons until they went and got Blair Walsh. So Ryan Longwell's obviously on the list. Obviously, you could talk about the guy who wore number 4 and that fun season in 2009 and the way he played at age 40. Greg Jennings was the one too that kind of sticks out to me, just because when he retired, he ended up we found out he ended up staying and living here in the suburbs in the area, because it was just kind of nice that a guy that kind of stung the Vikings for a long time as a member of the Packers just comes over and plays with the Vikings for 2 years, and then I think he went to Miami or something like that for a season after that, and then retired, and it was oh, Greg Jennings still lives here. Okay, that's kind of cool. So Greg Jennings is kind of one too that stands out. Zadarius Smith, I think, coming in last year and I know he didn't finish the season quite as well, but I know he's kind of dealing with some injuries and everything. But the first half of the season last year, he was terrific. He was outstanding because he was healthy, and you saw him in games, and you were like, "Oh yeah, Zadarius Smith is still really good." You know what I mean? Because there was kind of that thought, like, "Oh yeah, he might be kind of washed, not the same guy, dealing with injuries and everything." But for the first half of last year, he was fantastic. It was kind of too bad that he was dealing with some injuries and stuff late in the year, and he wasn't quite as effective. So you might remember this guy from his time playing for the Buffalo Bills, but do you remember Bryce Pop?
Bryce Pop is on my list. I
Yeah,
absolutely do. Bryce Pop had a season with Buffalo where he got like 17 sacks and it made no sense. It was like, what in the world? And they got him from Green Bay. I was like, this is the greatest find of all time. And then he never really did anything again. And he ended up with the Vikings at the end of his career. Minnesota guy, right? I think as well. Or he went to, is he Gopher? Or there's some Minnesota connection, I think, with Bryce Pop, isn't there?
he wasn't a Gopher. I think was he from Minnesota? I don't know. I seem to remember some sort of Minnesota connection too, but I know he did not play for the Gophers. I know that.
I'm looking it up.
Um,
I'm looking it up. Keep going
I
with your
am
list.
too.
I'm gonna find what the connection is here. Did he work here? He's from Iowa.
Right. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, yes, he did. He did. He was on the Gophers coaching staff in 2017. So
Oh,
there
okay.
is a connection. He's an Iowa guy and he worked on the coaching staff. So there's your Bryce. Everyone was wondering, what's the Bryce Pop connection to Minnesota other than the fact that he was a Viking? There it is. Now you have
Okay.
your answer. Now you can sleep well.
That's kind of random. That was 2017. That was the PJ Flex first year. That's an interesting connection. Okay. And anyway, continue on with my list. Another guy that I came up with was Roy Barker. And the reason why is Roy Barker was a guy who played for the Vikings for a long time. Ended up, I think finished either finished his career with the Packers or he like went to the Packers and then came back to the Vikings to finish his career. But Roy Barker with the Vikings, he was just kind of like a guy, just kind of this, oh, okay, defensive end, kind of a pass rusher. He'll get, 4 or 5 sacks a season. Then he goes to San Francisco and he just like randomly has like a couple of like double digit sack seasons, like 12 and a half sacks for like a couple of years with the Niners. And then I think he ended up in Green Bay for like a season. But yeah, I always like as a kid, I remember Roy Barker just kind of being, when I'm 9, 10 years old and I don't know enough about football yet, and I'm just kind of watching all these Vikings players and they're just like everything to me. So like even though these guys are kind of like some of these guys are just kind of guys, they're just mediocre players, but they're just like, oh, Roy Barker's awesome, that type of thing. So he's on my list. And then another guy I had Jim McMahon, man. Like Jim McMahon, obviously everybody knows him as the Chicago Bears quarterback when they had that great team in '85 and won the Super Bowl with the great defense. But Jim McMahon came in with the Vikings in '93 and stepped in as a starting quarterback and got them to the playoffs. And the guy just played his tail off in that wild card game against the Giants and just got beat up and hit. And he hung in there as best he could. And then, the Vikings end up losing that game. Then he goes on, I think he had maybe one stop after that and then went to Green Bay and he was on that Packers team that won Super Bowl 31. I think he was Brett Favre's backup when they beat the Patriots in the Superdome. So Jim McMahon is the guy too that just like the coolest dude, right? Just had the shades and just like super, super cool. So yeah, there's my list.
Well, I can't really add to that list because I think those are all the best ones. Robert Ferguson, you could throw out there. If you wanted
Yep.
to be funny, you might mention Bashad Breeland played for the Packers and also was a Viking as well. Todd Bauman, very briefly, a Green Bay Packer, I think, when Aaron Rodgers got hurt and he got signed there. There's some really kind of like random and funny ones. I think you hit probably the best. Keith Millard, very briefly, a Packer, right? Is that right? After
Yep.
the whole knee thing and everything else. And of course, next year, Aaron Rodgers will be. Stop it. Stop it, Manny. It had to be said. It had to be done. And I
Well,
did not realize I did not realize that Jan Stenerud was also a Green Bay Packer as well, one of the greatest kickers of all time. So there's some extra notes for you.
When I was looking up this list of just because I just got a list and I knew a lot of guys already. Robert Ferguson, Corn Robinson is another one too. You could probably talk about Greg Jennings, obviously. Uh, but I did not realize. I knew he had gotten drafted by the Vikings in the mid '80s and was with the Vikings for a couple of years. I had forgot that Steve Bono played for the Packers, and he was Brett Favre's backup in 1997 when they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Broncos. I had forgotten about that, and then I saw that on the list. I was like, "Oh yeah, Steve Bono. That's right." So yeah, there's another one.
You ever notice, Manny, recently that commercials are kind of targeted toward people our age, where you'll see like characters from The Office in a commercial or, like nostalgia stuff, old songs, things like that. And you go, hey, wait a minute. I think that they're targeting all their marketing to me now. Like instead of my parents and references from the 70s or what, now it's like us. That's what this show has been over the last like 20 minutes. Like we are if you are older than like 34 or then this was perfect for you and probably a lot of fun. We target it exactly toward you. Let's finish up with this, but I want to know if you think they're going to win and where it goes from here. But first, we got to talk about prize picks. If you were watching last night, prize picks. I made my selections. I went over with KJ Osborne with more yards for KJ Osborne and more yards for Kirk Cousins in this game because I think that they're going to throw the ball a lot. And I also think they're going to try to cover the heck out of Jordan Addison. So there will be yardage out there for KJ Osborne and Kirk Cousins. And what I mean when I talk about this is with prize picks, you go to prizepicks.com and you just pick more or less with yardage or with touchdowns or even sometimes with field goals. And there's all sorts of sports as well. You got the NBA starting, the NHL, so you can do a lot. But with football specifically, we've been having a great time picking Kirk Cousins each week. Will he go more or less for his yardage total? So go to prizepicks.com/purple. Use the code purple for a first deposit match up to $100. And I put in 20 to win 100 on my pick. I mean, it's not a lot that you have to put down to win a decent amount of money if you hit on your more or less selections. So go there, prizepicks.com/purple. Use the code purple for a first deposit match up to $100 and enjoy daily fantasy sports made easy where you don't have to spend all day on your fantasy team. What do you think, man? You think they're going to win?
I do think they're going to win. I do think it's going to be competitive. I think it's going to be close. Um, it might even be ugly at times, just because a lot of times you just don't really know what you're going to see out of either one of these teams. But I do think they're going to find a way to win. I think the Vikings are feeling really good about themselves. Um, they played so well on Monday night. Kirk Cousins played really well. The defense was terrific. And I think they're a little more confident now, going forward. Now, can they sustain it? That'll be kind of the question going into this game. But I think they're feeling pretty good. I think they're going to carry some of that momentum from last week into this one, and they're going to find a way to win. Could be ugly at times just because it's a weird game against a team that's not very good. But I'll say the Vikings find a way to win this game 24-20.
I'm trying to call my shot here and be very bold and say the Vikings win by 2 scores, which shouldn't be bold in the NFL because other teams do it all the time. I, it's amazing to me how rarely the Vikings get to 30 points also. And I was watching, Cleveland with a backup quarterback have more than 30 points and Indianapolis with a backup quarterback. And I'm going like, why is it that they can never put somebody away, run away, get 30 plus points and be dancing off the field at the end? I think that this is this week that Jordan Love has a couple real bad picks or fumbles, and Brian Flores plays games with his head the whole time, and they have a really good win and carry over what they did in San Francisco. And then we start talking about, do they buy as opposed to sell? Can they win the division? Can they track down Detroit? Can this be one of the outlier seasons where a team goes from 0-3 to the playoffs? If they do not do that, if they come up short here, then it's going to be a Denny Green moment. You are what we thought you were, an inconsistent roller coaster team that can't put together multiple performances, and you're never going to get better than say 8-9. So say goodbye to your pass rusher, and we'll see you next year. I'm in a weird spot with this, Manny, because I will get emails all the time where people say, I hope they lose this week so they don't fool themselves into thinking they're a Super Bowl contender. And I feel you. As the master commander of Tankland, I ride the tank and I drive it. And yet at the same time, when I get that email, I go, "Oh, it just doesn't feel right though." Because if you're going to tank, then that means Flores didn't do his job. Then that means Addison didn't play well, or someone got hurt, or something went horribly wrong. If you can't get back into the playoffs with this upcoming schedule, that means something went pretty wrong for you that may not be reflective well of the future. So I end up kind of conflicted over that whole deal of like, yeah, you're probably going to have to draft, high if you want a good quarterback, because there's some good quarterbacks in this draft. And yet we got a whole season to play still. There's more games to play than have been played, even though it feels like we've been doing this forever this season, because every game is like 5 games worth of drama with this Vikings team. But I just can't, I probably can't get to a point where I'm like, oh yeah, well, they should start throwing away this season, or you should hope that they just completely fall apart and collapse. It's go to be competitive, push for the playoffs, do everything you can to win if you beat the Packers. If not, I can't defend any of that. Then it's like you got to start thinking toward the future.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also kind of just as a, you know, with my mindset being kind of big picture, yeah, I mean, would it probably serve them better if, long term, big picture, if they went like 5-12 and had a higher draft pick and got in a position to get that young quarterback of the future and move on from Kirk Cousins. Yeah, but on the flip side, for as critical as I am of Kirk Cousins, I don't want to watch Nick Mullins play all due respect to Nick Mullins, I don't want to watch him play quarterback for the last 8-9 games of the season. So I want to see Kirk Cousins stay healthy, finish out the season, and just kind of see, because I also want to continue to see Jordan Addison develop and grow as a wide receiver, because that would be very beneficial for them long term. And Jordan Addison will have more success if Kirk Cousins is his quarterback versus Nick Mullins. So, and the same kind of goes for Justin Jefferson if he ends up coming back later in the season. So I want to see those guys perform really well and continue to develop as we go along here. So yeah, I'm really kind of conflicted on the entire thing too, because I know them kind of going into tank mode would kind of serve them better long term, but I also don't really, just as the fan in me doesn't want to really like see that happen, because to your point, it means that, certain guys within the organization, that they just didn't do a good enough job. And that I don't, I want Brian Flores to be successful as a defensive coordinator here, because I want him to be able to stick around. And, and as kind of a fan of him, I want to see him maybe get an opportunity to be a head coach again down the line. Well, that will come if he continues to be a really good defensive coordinator here. So, yeah, it's a tricky situation, to say the least.
We can't control it. We can only watch and see what happens and then break it down next week. So you will be back on your normal schedule since there's not Monday Night Football. So we'll talk again on Monday night, break it all down and what it means from there. And, we'll see what happens. But I guess I got to have more information. I'm not ready to say what I think they should do. I think there's a lot of arguments for if this, then that, kind of like a choose your own adventure. But we have to know the result of what happens next to know what their playoff odds really are. If they win this game, it might be like 60%. If they lose this game, it might be like 15%. I think there's that big of a difference for one game for what you could do for the rest of the year. So great stuff, Manny. A lot of fun as always. The Bucks are still losing, but they're like, no, actually they're getting killed now. So they tied it up at 10, and I was ready to apologize. Like, oh, sorry, Bucks, I didn't mean it. What I said. No, I mean it. The Bucks are terrible, and the Vikings losing to them is a shame. They're down by 14. Anyway, I can't say more about the game or Jeff Bezos will sue me. So thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you again very soon. Football